Using meta cars is definitely a hot button topic for some people, so I thought I'd put a list together of my top 5 unexpected cars in Motorfest so that if you want to drive something other than meta once in a while, you have a few ideas of cars that you don't really see too often in the grand races. Let's go! All right, real quick before we get into it, I'm running a tournament this Sunday. It is a huge event for Christmas. We're giving away over 13 million CC and 9 copies of the Ultimate Edition of this game. So if you want to check that out, you can definitely win some prizes by either competing in the tournament or taking place in the rap contest, or potentially getting some giveaways in the chat. That starts at 2 p.m. CST on Sunday the 22nd. All right, let's get into it. So just to address the elephant in the room, my stance on meta is pretty simple. I think everyone should drive whatever cars they feel like at the time. You don't have to use meta, and you don't have to stop using meta. Drive what you want, period. That being said, these 5 cars on this list aren't meta, because if they were, they really wouldn't qualify for a list like this, would they? All right, let's get into it, man. Here are the pros and cons of each one, and I've ranked these in terms of least unexpected car to most unexpected car. All right, at number 5, we have the 2022 Defender 110 V8. This is in Street 1. This car surprised me a lot. It's a big body SUV. It really doesn't seem like a car that would do well, but its test times are fairly good. It's an all-wheel drive vehicle, which means it's extremely controllable for most players. It has very good acceleration. It's excellent in the NOS power and acceleration departments. It's just something that has a lot in the low end, but it also has decent top speed. And because of that big body, you really don't get pushed around too much, which happens to be a big problem in Street 1. Definitely at the beginning, you've got cars flying all over the place, and it kind of holds its own inside that pack. Now, as far as things that it doesn't do well, the number one thing is it understeers. Now, you don't want to hear that usually in the grand races, because understeer means that you have to take corners a lot slower. However, because of the acceleration, it sort of makes up for it, and it sort of balances out. As you can see in this clip, I kind of made it to the front, and I'm hanging in there with a 911 2.7, which happens to be the best car in the class. So I'd say it definitely holds its own. Obviously, no matter which car on this list you pick, if you go up against a meta car with a decent driver, you're not going to do too well. But this is a decent car to have fun with every once in a while. All right, at number 4, the 2009 Chevrolet Corvette ZR1 in Street 2. Now, the reason this made the list, and I just barely put this on the list, is because this actually was a previous meta car that we used really early on in the game, and it's because of its excellent handling. It literally has top-notch handling. It's also got very above average guttering, and it's got decent NOS power and decent top speed. And it's one of the best guttering cars in Street 2. Now, it's obviously not quite as good as the F40, but it is decent. And because of all of those things, it really does well on courses, particularly in the city and in the volcano areas where you definitely need to use those gutters. Now, if you don't know what guttering is and you need an explanation, this video actually will show that to you. I'll put a link in the description for that, but that is going to be for beginners. If you just don't know what guttering is, or you need to learn how to gutter, that's going to help you a lot. Now, as far as the ZR1's cons or things that it's not good at, it has slightly slow acceleration. Now, I say slightly slow acceleration because it actually does okay, but it just doesn't accelerate as well as a lot of the other cars in Street 2. So it's not really, I would say it's probably average acceleration. If it had better acceleration, it would probably be a much higher ranked car, and maybe it wouldn't even make this list at all. And then the other thing that it doesn't do well with is it has very slow shifting. And because of that shifting, you have to be much more aware of what you're doing going into corners and coming out of corners. You need to plan what gear you're going to be in. You need to make sure that you're doing that, because if you make a mistake on shifting, you combine that with the slower acceleration. If you go into a corner and leave, you could actually lose slipstream on a group if you're not careful. But because of that handling, it's just unreal to drive. I highly recommend this car for anyone in Street 2. All right, at number 3, the Nissan GTR 50 by Ital Design. This car is unreal. I really hope you guys take this car out and try it in the grand races. It has very good NOS power. It has above average handling. It's all-wheel drive, so it's very controllable. It's really stable off-road for all those shortcuts. And it has elite acceleration, like really good off the line acceleration. So I highly recommend this car. It handles well enough to keep up with the majority of cars in the class. It's just all around very good. Other than the acceleration itself, it doesn't really have anything that it's like elite at, but it's very good all around. I highly recommend this one. Now, as far as what it's not good at, is it kind of has a slower top end acceleration. Like once you get into 6th gear, it just dies. You know, it's good on the lower gears, but it kind of just dies in 6th. So it really needs NOS or slipstream to keep this car going. If you don't have that, you're going to be burning a bunch of NOS. If you're all by yourself on a highway, that's like death for this car. And it has a slight understeer problem. It's not a lot. It actually handles really well. It's just slight understeer when you compare that to like the top of the class cars that handle really well. Like certainly compared to the Agera R or the Jesko. All right, at number 2, the 1930 Proto Hup 1 in racing. Now this one is unexpected because you just look at this car and you're like, what is this thing? It just doesn't look fast. It looks old. You know, the body of the car, it's a 1930. It's just like, I don't know if this is going to do very well. It's probably not going to accelerate too well. But I'll be honest, this thing has really, really above average cornering. Like the car corners really well. It's got decent top speed. It's got great NOS power, and it has really good guttering as well. So the car just overall handles fairly good, and it's got good acceleration. It can stay with some of the top cars in the class, particularly when slipstream is in effect. Now, as far as what it doesn't do too well, it has a really slow turn in, and this takes a lot of time to get used to. It feels a lot like the Camaro SS in that, you know, it's sort of this delayed steering. And so when you're using this car, I just think once you get used to it, it's something that is going to be very good, but it takes time. You have to, you know, really pay attention to your lines and make sure that you're turning in slightly early, because once it's in the corner, it really hooks and it really grips up. So it'll actually give you a nice tight corner, but it does take some time because it has that really slow turn in. And in addition to that, it shifts pretty slowly for the class. Like racing class, a lot of these cars are like extremely high performance racing machines and they shift really, really fast. This one doesn't. It's an older car. It's got an old transmission. It doesn't have a nice smooth shifting. It is very slow in terms of shifting for the class, which again can cost you when it comes to, you know, trying to stay in slipstream. If you make a mistake in shifting, then it's going to be a problem. Now, obviously, if you're an automatic, that's not going to be the case, but if you're a manual and you make a mistake, it's going to be an issue for you. You could lose slipstream. All right, and finally, at number 1, the most unexpected car for me was the IVT Falcon S1000 in Rally Raid. Now, I'll be honest with you, I've tried the quads, I've tried the motorcycles, I've tried the buggies, and they all suck. They're all terrible. I don't like using them at all. But the Falcon S1000 is actually good. It's actually good. It's actually usable in the class. Like once you get used to the handling, because I'll talk about that in a second, it actually is good. It has a ton of grip in the corners. It kind of slips a little bit on acceleration. Once you're in the race and you're moving, it actually does very good with grip. And so because of that handling, it makes it super viable in certain situations. Now, on top of that, has very good NOS power as well. So the good handling plus the NOS power makes up for some of these cons, one of which is an acceleration problem. So it doesn't accelerate that well. You need the NOS in order to get that acceleration going, but because it has the NOS power, it sort of makes up for it. Now, in terms of the cornering, it is a little bit weird. So when you first drive this thing, it's going to be a culture shock because most of the other cars in the class are very smooth, like the 959 or the Tacoma, or, you know, name it. The cars are really smooth and not very bumpy. Well, this car has a ton of grip. It's got a lot of grip, and because of that, it has this wiggle in the corners because the tires are trying to grip up, but they're also losing traction at the same time, and then they grip up and then lose traction and grip. You just have to get used to this. This is something that is almost like a visual bug of the car. It feels like the car is shaking back and forth when you take a real tight corner. It's not really like you can just steer your way through the corner. So just take some time, hear me out on that, try the car for a little bit, and let me know what you think in the comments. But aside from that, in terms of things that it doesn't do well, and this is not something that it can do well or not do well, it's just a small vehicle. And the facts are, when you have a small vehicle in an off-road situation with a bunch of cars that are wild and people are losing grip and sliding all over the place into corners, you do get pushed around a little bit. So it's not something that's like you can hold your own. Like if you were using the Hummer, for example, it's very big, it's very heavy, you can push people around, no problem. But this one, you're gonna have to, like, you know, bob and weave and dart in and out of gaps in order to actually, you know, hold your own within those corners. All right, that's my list, guys. I'd appreciate it if you left a comment with your own personal top 5 unexpected cars in Motorfest, just to further help the community with some variation when they're driving. I really appreciate you guys watching. Thank you so much. DM me anytime on Instagram or Discord. I'll catch you on the next one. Trigger out.